Well, thanks very much for inviting me and my colleague Ahmed Shams. We have been collaborating on South Sinai for several years now, coming from slightly different backgrounds. So we will give this brief 10-minute introduction together, and with the time I've already wasted, I will get straight into it. I'll start by providing a bit of wider background to the heritage that stands central to our work, which mainly relates to agriculture and water management. Before I'll hand over to Ahmed, who will discuss the failures of governance and intersectoral decision-making in more detail and present a low-cost watershed management approach grounded in traditional landscape usage. Oh, hold on, I haven't even put my screen in full. So very briefly, Ahmed represents Sinai Peninsula Research, which is a 20-year interdisciplinary field survey recording the geographical memory of local Bedouin across the high mountains of South Sinai, resulting in numerous publications, including an atlas covering some 14,000 different Bedouin place names and places of interest, including known archaeological and heritage sites. And I represent the Endangered Archaeology in the Middle East and North Africa projects, which you will hear more about this week, which uses remote sensing, so the use of satellite imagery and aerial photography, to map archaeological and heritage sites, as well as disturbances and threats to them across the whole MENA region. And our collaboration, the Sinai Archaeo Water Projects, focus on this area here, highlighted on the map, which includes a large number of scattered cultural heritage sites, ranging from the Paleolithic to the early to mid-20th century, in the shape of local Bedouin and also travel heritage, such as travelers' inscriptions and camping sites. But these often also have roots in the Islamic or Byzantine periods. And we focus specifically, as the name of the project suggests, on sites with an agricultural character, i.e. relating to agriculture and water management. Central to our study area is this site, however, the famous St. Catherine's Monastery, which became a World Heritage Area in 2002. Here you see a picture of the monastery within Wadi Adir, taken in the early 20th century. It was then home to a relatively small and dispersed population and enjoyed relatively low visitor numbers due to the remote character of the landscape. And the landscape is really an arid mountain landscape with steep-sided wadis, which are particularly vulnerable to flash flood events, which seem to have increased since the 1990s, triggering interventions that Ahmed will discuss in more detail. This is a living heritage landscape as well. Many of the sites here, particularly those relating to water management and agriculture, are probably Byzantine or Islamic in origin, but are still in use today. Examples include this kanat or tunnel well irrigation system, which Ahmed published some years ago as orchards. And these sites that are still in use are interspersed with abandoned sites of orchards and settlements, highlighting the long-lasting continuity of use over many centuries in this area. Now, this is a very vulnerable and precariously balanced landscape and ecosystem. And recently, two factors have really appeared that threaten to unbalance this. And the first of these was, interestingly, the fact that World Heritage status was declared in 2002, focusing on the 6th century monastery, associated monastic buildings, and also other archaeological sites in this region, giving some protection, of course, but also, in combination with road construction, led to a massive increase in visitors to the areas, which created economic opportunities, which then led to rapid urban growth, as you can see here on these two satellite images contrasting the 1970s with 2050. And a decline in traditional landscape knowledge. And this is only getting worse because current construction projects are doubling the size of the built-up area and reinforcing these processes that are already taking place. Now, a second thing that I already alluded to is that since the 1990s, more extreme weather events have started taking place as well, including cyclic droughts, snow precipitation, and increasing flash flood events. And the latter triggered the construction of over 140 small water dams and more than 20 storage dams across the mountain range, many of which sadly show high evaporation and sedimentation rates. And I'll hand over now to Ahmed, who will discuss these interventions in more detail and highlight the importance of building on threatened traditional landscape knowledge to reach more sustainable and resilient practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Letty. Now I will move to the continuation of our presentation, another 5 minutes. So I'm sharing my screen. We should be able to see it now. So basically now we are going to introduce 3 dimensions to highlight the missing links, some of these missing links. These are key dimensions for us with regards to the archaeological landscape and the context which Letty just presented now. So the first one here is we're talking about the mountain landscape as a nature reserve. So the question is here basically each slide of these 5 slides I'm going to present now are going to present one question, a dimension, and basically we will elaborate a bit on the context and then later in the discussion for sure. So the first question here, is it a particular space of development? We're talking here about whether it's this mountain area as a geographical category and in the Egyptian legislation in a way, the national legislation, is it considered as a kind of particular space of development? You might find similar examples like this in Italy, Switzerland, Austria, which is sensible ones. And these laws, national laws, were introduced in an earlier stage than the global stage. The global stage took place early in 1990s and 1992 specifically during this kind of Rio Earth Summit, when the mountains for the first time were recognized as a kind of geographical category. The only status for this area to be recognized as a geographical category or a kind of a particular space of development which requires, let's say, special regulations is just only represented in the nature reserve status of this area, which it was recognized as a protectorate basically in the 1980s, but with the EU Commission fund, it was supported between 1996 and 2003. And there was a management plan which qualified this area as a UNESCO Heritage Site in 2002. So this is one consideration. The other one also is the micro value of the landscape, because Letty here highlighted the interventions, typically external intervention from central government, for example, trying to introduce development in this area, which is very positive thing to have attention from the central government to a local area. But on the other hand, you want to make sure that the full value of the area is recognized. And when we talk here about the full value, we're talking about, for example, the statics and scenic quality of the area. Are they well considered and protected? In the previous documents, yes, but in action and practice now, it's not very well considered in the projects which are being introduced to the area, tourism projects. One concept to this I would like to highlight basically is the cost of devalued practices, which means, for example, if you have a Bedouin orchard in the high mountains of Sinai Peninsula tended by Bedouins, which doesn't produce a lot of, let's say, agriculture produce to have a kind of economical feasibility. But at the same time, the existence of these orchards represent a value for the landscape, which attracts a lot of ecoculture tourists to the area. So there is a value to support the activities, the continuation of these activities in the high mountains of Sinai Peninsula in order to reflect on the revenues. Nowadays, what you can see basically is that most of the local activities are only considering one form of value, which is the monetary value or the direct revenues which are coming from the ecoculture tourism, but they are not considering the landscape value. And this is more sustainable. And it is very important, and this is the last point on this slide, that basically we highlight the idea that we need to introduce this kind of monetary value for the culture values, because in a wider context, let's say. And then the third one is the introduction of new structures in the area. This kind of traditional knowledge versus contemporary knowledge. So for example, they are building a large number of small water dams in the pre-context of supporting the area and combating climate change, for example. So they're trying to store water in order for, like, let's say during the flash floods for dry days or dry seasons. But this is not practically valuable anyway, because it actually defers all this kind of, it doesn't follow basically the traditional practices in the area. And this is more or less like a central outsider decision-making intervention from the lowland in a highland area. So this is something else to consider in the thing. What you can see here in this photo are 2 water dams. The upper one with the channel, what you can see here, is Byzantine water dam, which is almost 2,000 years old. And the other one is a kind of like a recent intervention, more like a contemporary water dam. And as you can see here, after a single flash flood, the Byzantine water dam is in very good shape, and the new one is totally buried. And the Bedouins were trying to basically recover the reservoir by, and this is a problem actually, that they didn't consider all these kind of traditional practices anyway, and where to place a water dam in the right place. Especially that actually they built the contemporary water dam right below the upper one, which is a Byzantine one. So they didn't learn much from what was already there anyway. This is just some examples of all these water dams, the small water dams, 20 plus, which they built in the high mountains of Sinai Peninsula, which does not really align well with the traditional knowledge and practices in the area, similar to the water conduit you can see to the right here. And then it raises another question: what are we going to do with all these small water dams, which many of them are subjected to very high sedimentation rate and evaporation rate? So basically, these water dams will be blocked over a very short period, so the lifespan of the water dams are very short. So what can we do with these water dams, especially that they have also an impact on the statics of the landscape in a way? So one way to think about it basically is to think about these water dams as a kind of like experimental ones now, because you cannot really remove them in a way. So these are water dams built in very different places in the high mountains of Sinai Peninsula. So you can consider them as kind of experimental water dams in different settings, and we can learn from this in a way. Learning, I won't go through the details of this one, it sounds too complex to go for it now, but just reflecting on the idea that basically all this relation between evaporation, moisture content, groundwater recharge, and all these aspects of socio-ecological or typical ecological things which relate to climate change, this could be learned from, by the way, this chart was produced from the traditional practices. Just we translated it in a more like ecological terms anyway. So because of the, and I'm wrapping now, I'm aware of the time. So basically what's happening now, what we're trying to say, that studying the traditional structures which already exist in the landscape can produce very scientific knowledge, established scientific knowledge, because these structures were based on trial and error for a very long time. So their settings, the dimensions of these structures are very well calculated through trial and error, which can produce a very efficient water budget for the high mountains of Sinai Peninsula, and it will help us, this traditional knowledge, to combat climate change. It's a kind of re-engineering in a way. And on the last bit on this one, that basically this also could translate into representative catchments, in the sense like we can set further measurements in a representative catchment, for example, or a valley in this area, in order to set measures and integrate the traditional knowledge which we can learn from this kind of traditional structures. And thank you for this.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. And I so appreciate you wrapping it up. You know, it takes extra time when you swap between presenters. Our next presentation is by Ms. Hannah Lewis of Safina Projects, Arc for Iraq. Hannah, would you be ready to share your slides?
Yep, will do.
There you go. We're now seeing sort of the presenter mode, but that works, if that works for you.
Okay. All right. So, what can the vernacular maritime and craft heritage of Iraq teach us about climate crisis? I'm going to share some perspectives on that question from the point of view of our project, Arc for Iraq. Since 2016, we've been documenting and reviving Iraq's inland boat building traditions and related crafts. We've worked with makers and communities to reconstruct traditional boat types that are now almost extinct. Here you can see a workshop reconstructing the kaya or espia, a frame-built barge that was used to transport heavy cargoes down the Euphrates. Boats like this carried the lime and tar that built ancient cities like Ur. This photo shows one of the last makers of the kaya, now in his late 80s, who helped his father build them in the 1950s and 60s. So how does this heritage relate to climate crisis? The obvious way is as a victim, as in this picture of drought in the Iraqi marshlands. Climate crisis is another layer of social disruption and ecological degradation on top of decades of conflict, displacement of people, pollution, and upstream damming causing water shortages, among other issues. Heritage is just one aspect of life that's under threat from this multifaceted emergency. But today I'd like to highlight two other lenses for looking at heritage and climate crisis. heritage as a vector of understanding, and heritage as a source of solutions. So first of all, what do I mean in this context by heritage as a vector of understanding of how we got here? So first, some facts about this heritage that put things into perspective that might be difficult to grasp otherwise. On the top left here, we see a guffa coracle in an Assyrian relief carving. They're depicted in Sumerian cylinder seals as far back as 3500 BCE. Yet there they still were in these black and white photographs up to the mid-20th century, carrying cargoes and passengers on the Tigris. When my co-founder, Rashad Salim, began traveling to Iraq in 2013 and trying to track down the last guffas, he could only find one living maker of traditional guffas, an old woman in Babylon who had stopped making fishermen's guffas after the 2003 invasion. He still found a few guffas in use by fishermen on the southern Tigris, but they were made of metal, not the traditional basketry and tar. So what we see here is that this boat type had endured the rise and fall of a series of civilizations and empires in Mesopotamia over millennia, from the Sumerians to the Islamic era. The guffa was formed by direct relationship between people and their environment with the materials it provided, grasses, palm, and tar. As each civilization collapsed or was conquered, the guffa outlasted them. It was resilient. But now, in the last few decades, the guffa in its traditional form has reached the point of disappearance. The point I'm making is that the modern colonial and post-colonial era is an anomaly, a departure from what has gone before. The interdependence of people and their local environment has been broken. Looking even further back, these maps show the prehistoric process of climate change and sea level rise that turned a marshy valley into what we now know as the Gulf between 14,000 and 6,000 years ago. This process, or some of it, was perhaps the Great Flood, first documented in early Mesopotamian writings, and presumably part of an oral tradition before that, then retold in the Bible as the story of Noah. Our project, the Ark Reimagined, began with Rashad as an artist, wondering how a Mesopotamian ark might really have been built. We're not trying to prove whether there was a real ark or not, but drawing attention to the way that representations of that part of the past have centered the written word and European images of the ark and overlook the actual intangible heritage that has been passed down in Mesopotamia or Iraq from that time. Archaeological investigations of that time can offer perspectives on the social and cultural impacts of climate change. Climate change was pushing people away from their lands, causing stress on resources and narrowing people's options for survival. This seems to have been a factor in the emergence of the first urban civilizations, arguably the first step in a process that led us to today's globalized modern civilization that is causing a new level of climate crisis. Understanding more about that time might help us to see how we got here and clarify our options for moving forward. So now we move on to heritage as a source of solutions. Heritage is an embodiment of knowledge, skills, and ways of living that can inform us in addressing issues that our modern ways of thinking and being are not actually coping with. One way this works is through nature connection. Research has shown, and common sense would suggest, that being motivated to look after the environment emerges from having a relationship with it. If you don't spend any time engaging with your ecological surroundings, you won't care, you won't notice or care about them. Linking this nature connection with heritage, in this case through the use of traditional boats that have been used on these waters for millennia, is special because it's a reminder of how that relationship between or the relationship with the land and the waters, is not just something that happens in the present moment, but is part of a long ancestral history. It's a connection with culture as well as nature, because the two have been intertwined as long as there have been humans. So these are some photos of people enjoying the boats and being on the water at our events and in our new
بالقوارب في فعالية حضرناها في العراق.
boat clubs.
What Arabic?
Shall I carry on? Anyway.
If you can, thank you. Apologies.
No problem. Sailing, using the wind to power movement, is an experience of agency through relationship to a power bigger than oneself, one that can't be controlled but can be cooperated with. This could be seen as a metaphor for the relationship with nature, but it's more than a metaphor, it's a physical experience. The relationship with the elements of water and earth and air is something instinctive. I love these photos of children playing in the irrigation ditches of a palm orchard in Babylon. Meeting and working with the people who manage these orchards in a traditional way and harvest materials from them is a window into a more sustainable, mutually sustaining relationship between culture and nature. We've also met people with specialist knowledge like beekeeping and the medicinal and food uses of wild plants. These practices are important to sustain. Another way we can look to heritage for solutions is considering alternatives to disposable plastics. Plastic waste is everywhere in Iraq. These plastics are direct substitutes for traditional products that previously served the same purpose. Here on the left is the hib, a ceramic water cooler, in this case available as a public water supply. The other pictures show water ladles used for drinking. The tar coating has antiseptic properties that help to keep water safe to drink. Here on the right, you can see typical ways meals are now served in plastic containers, and the group below are gathered around a long plastic sheet. At the end of the meal, all the waste is gathered up in the plastic sheet and thrown away. But in the past, people would have sat around something more like the mat on the left, made from woven palm leaves that was reused over and over. The replacement of traditional products has deprived rural populations of livelihoods, as well as causing endemic pollution. It's a lose-lose situation. Here we see a material called karab, made from the stub of a palm branch. It's a light, foam-like material. We're exploring ways to revive its traditional uses in today's context, to make swim floats, life jackets, and shoe soles. If materials can be used in a way that creates livelihoods at the same time as conserving healthy ecosystems, that's a win-win. Finally, I'll touch on our recent work with students at the University of Basra. In December, we worked with craftspeople to construct a Modif reed house in the grounds of Basra Museum as part of our Material Cultural Heritage Lab. Architecture students took part in the making and documented it, and are now using the traditional techniques to develop their own designs for structures like shading, fencing, and entranceways. These are some photos of the lab. Is that my warning, or is that the end?
That's 10 minutes. So if you can wrap up as quickly as you can, that would be great.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly touch with, last year we took part in the Biennale Architettura in Venice and saw some interesting examples of how traditional building materials and techniques were being used in new ways. So sometimes this is about innovating with form, as in these ceramic tile structures, and sometimes it also brings in unexpected issues. Like this was a project about how the built environment can accommodate more microbes and how that's actually better for our health, to have a greater diversity of microbes, so that the harmful organisms tend to be outweighed and mitigated by the benign ones. So this idea of a healthy urban microbiome is an example of how scientific understanding and traditions of organic construction could come together to help address ecological crises. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hannah. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Quickly moving on in recognition of our time. Our next presenter is Ms. Mara Visonà. Mara, are you available? Are you ready to share your slides?
Sure. Can you see my screen?
It's in the process of sharing. There we go.
Yeah,
Wonderful, you are up.
maybe I can share it in Can you see it like the presentation or only the visualizer of Adobe Acrobat?
It's still showing.
Excuse me, you have to assign me as an interpreter.
But I think
Sorry, it's still showing up as a sort of as the app, not a full screen.
Okay. Now?
No, there we go.
Okay, perfect.
You're done. Wonderful.
It takes a little bit long.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mara. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to discuss the role of multidisciplinary historical landscape studies in current territorial planning, both to preserve their cultural and historical characteristics, but also as well as to face the effects of climate and environmental changes. To do so, I will introduce the issue of malaria in Maremma Grossetana. But before that, please let me to clarify what I mean by the term landscape. I know it is probably clear for most of you, but I noticed that it's still used in different ways across humanities. Essentially, in this case, I'm going to use the term landscape to indicate all those features that characterize a specific area, which are the result of the interaction between geographical elements and human actions. And here we have mostly recent examples, but in the past, as today, humans have played a part in the process of environmental transformation and in the creation of landscapes. Even though in several areas of the planet, the current landscape forms seems to have totally obliterated the traces of past landscapes, every landscape should be considered, as always to be considered as the result of the superimposition of a series of events and actions, both positive with the accumulation of material and negative with the erosion or removal of material, which have contributed over time to determining its current appearance. For these reasons, the study of ancient landscapes is fundamental for investigating the long-term human-environment relationship that shaped them. Environmental transformation and climate change have been a constant in the history of our planet, even before human action influenced them, and they affect human life today as in the past. Therefore, studying the long-term relationships between humans and the environment from a historical perspective is fundamental to analyze and predict the long-term responses of the environment to climate changes and to human actions. While for some actions the environmental response could be quite fast, some of the outcomes may take longer to manifest, and their effects may be difficult to predict. That's the reason why a territorial planning that ignores the long-term history of a human-environment relationship is also ignoring the responses of the environment and what the long-term outcomes of our actions may be. One of the most important points in studying landscape changes is that the alterations in the environmental balance could affect ecosystem in several different ways. For example, pushing humans and animals to migrate, increasing population density on some areas, but also, as we saw in very recent time, creating favorable conditions for the development and the spread of diseases and compromising the health status of humans and non-human population, increasingly exposing them to the effects of diseases, as the recent worldwide spread of COVID-19 has made even more evident. The case of malaria infection in Maremma Grossetana is a clear example of how climate and environmental changes can challenge the human life and non-human communities, and why an historical perspective on the problem is fundamental. Maremma Grossetana is a coastal plain of central Italy surrounding by the city of Grosseto. And for the most of its history, local landscape was characterized by the presence of a wide inner water body that was a lake that underwent a progressive swamping and whose reclamation was completed only after World War II. The presence of malaria has been for a long time assumed as an essential element of the whole history of Maremma Grossetana. Despite that, classical and early medieval historical sources as Cicerone or the Bolla Papale of 1138 do not mention the presence of malaria in the area, while for the same periods we can find traces of its presence in some neighboring areas. So Maremma was represented as fertile and prosperous, at least until the late 11th century. According to later historical sources, as Orlando Malavolti, who wrote in the 16th century, and Leonardo Ximenes, who wrote in the 18th century, a progressive decadence of landscape and life conditions in Malaria, as well as the decline of the city of Grosseto, occurred between the 13th and the 14th century, when the area was under the government of Medici family, that was an outsider decision makers. Landscape decadence appears to be strictly bounded to the climate change it occurred during the 14th century, as well as to the territorial policies more interested in economic return from licenses for fishing in the lake than in a programmatic management and development of Maremma, as it usually happens in marginal areas. In fact, while some geographical features certainly predispose to ideal conditions for the development and the spread of the infection, and wet areas in particular, certain human actions can also contribute to that, both directly and indirectly, creating areas of water stagnation and altering the salinity of water, creating a fertile environment for Anopheles, and leading to the so-called man-made malaria. Furthermore, a peculiar condition is represented by the phenomenon of Anopheles without malaria, that indicates a relevant presence of Anopheles mosquito in an area, but without the presence of the infection. The study of this phenomenon is emblematic of the delicate and constantly changing ecosystem balance of malaria. For this reason, especially in those areas where the presence of Anopheles is still considered as epidemiologically relevant, like Maremma, as well as in other world areas, knowledge of landscape changes and their impact on the proliferation of Anopheles and the plasmodium responsible for the infection is crucial. For this reason, the study of the diffusion of malaria in Maremma opens several research questions, which not only concern the identification of the first occurrence of the disease or its trends and impacts on local community, but also interactions between anthropic and environmental causes that led to its occurrence. These questions could be addressed through the analysis of the landscape changes. For example, the evolution of inner water bodies, like the expansion and the swamping of the lake, also anthropic and the anthropic actions like construction of channels, banks, or siltworks or road embankments. From this example, we could figure out why and how much disciplines that study historical evolution of landscapes are fundamental tools, not only for the conservation of their their historical value, but also to support future sustainable planning of the territory and the use of its resources. While geological and pedologic studies investigate landscape changes related to environmental phenomena, disciplines like archaeology, history, and geography aim to study landscape changes as the result of adapting behaviors and or political, economic, and social choices of human communities. Historical investigations on landscape should not only aim to deepen our knowledge of past landform, but also to provide concrete support in territorial planning. By studying long-term human-environment relationships, archaeology, history, and geography can provide data regarding the environmental response, the long-term environmental response to human actions. Furthermore, the study of the environmental changes and human actions that could have led to the onset of malaria in specific areas will prove useful for several regions of the world, which presents the condition of anopheles without malaria. That is true also in regions where the infection was eradicated decades ago, like Maremma, and for this reason it is essential to combine mosquito monitoring with in-depth studies of landscape changes linked to the emergence and the spread of the infection in order to prevent a recurrence. In conclusion, the aim of historic landscape study is therefore not to crystallize the landscape, as is often thought, but to provide in-depth knowledge to allow the demands of conservation and preservation to be combined with those of sustainable development.
Thank you so much, Mara, and you are bang on time, perfectly done, beautifully presented and perfectly on time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is Dr. Yapeng O. Yapeng, are you ready to share your screen?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marcy, for your introduction.
Wonderful.
And so as we were saying the whole night, we should learn from our past, right? But I think also it's very important to learn from our root, where we come from, where our urban civilization come from. So that is, we should learn from the rural, the countryside. And my presentation is about a vernacular infrastructure heritage, which is called Laochi. So Lao in Chinese means flat and Chi means pond. So basically Laochi is a type of flat pond. And so I would like to explore why it is a key for building climate resilient and livable countryside. So it's not only about being a green infrastructure, but also it's about livability. So there is really a combination between ecology and culture. Okay, so first of all, I would like to explore how does this traditional knowledge embedded in this flat pond contribute to climate adaptation while ensuring a green and safe living environment in semi-arid rural areas, and how can it be inherited today? Briefly, there will be three main parts. The first one, I'll give you an introduction to Laochi, and the second one will deal with the traditional knowledge system embedded in Laochi in terms of green construction and also climate mitigation. And then finally, I will briefly talk about how it has been revitalized in the past 10 years. What is Laochi? So as I mentioned in the beginning, it is an artificial flood pond in villages and towns in the semi-arid areas of the Les Plateaux to collect rainwater, drain and prevent flooding, and provide water for daily use and also for production activities. I like to, so when it was born, there was no precise historical records, but according to the climate records, we know that during the Ming Dynasty, which was more or less the 16th, 17th century, which was the little ice age in China. and there were a lot of extreme climate events and a lot of social uprisings, a lot of riots, and you can see also a lot of wars in this period. So probably during this period, the ancients in the rural areas, they invented this facility to mitigate the climate change. So there is a rich system of traditional knowledge embedded in Lodge, and we'll have a look later. But unfortunately, with the rapid rural modernization, rural development in China, so from the 1980s, they were gradually abandoned almost across my province, which is in the northwestern part of China, Shanxi province. Since there was also you have a lot of improved physical facilities, a lot of physical transformations, improving living conditions, but there has also been a worsened water ecology in rural areas. So the Shanxi province launched the Lodge Revitalization Initiative to help restore rural water ecology, but also a lot of other purposes as well. So first in terms of green construction, the construction of artificial ponds was was becoming very popular, especially in the Ming Dynasty. That was the 17th and 16th century. Like in this classical book on agricultural administration, written in 1628, the author Xu Guangqi just mentioned these techniques, and I won't go in detail, but according to modern scholars who studied this flood pond, the techniques can be summarized in six steps. So first, you have to use clay, and it's a local construction material, and you just then you beat it with a wood hammer until it is very, very fine, and then you just further refine it with sieve, and also you add 20% of lime and mix well. And then you start, when you clean up the sites, and you should build the anti-leakage layer. So you just lay and level the mixture of lime and on the bottom of the pond, sprinkle it to saturation, ram the water mixture to compaction, so that the infiltration mud blocks cracks causing leakage. And you would repeat this several times, and eventually an anti-leakage bottom of 10 to 15 centimeters thick is built. Briefly speaking, I think Lodge is a vital facility for rainwater management and risk management, and it is also it marks also a comprehensive utilization of natural resources, and also it is a small facility for water purification. Okay. So in terms of climate mitigation, first of all, it helps managing rainwater and manage the runoff in the village, and also it helps build a safe built environment. Like you can see on the in this photo on the right.
Yapeng, you've just muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, how about now?
Now we can hear you, yes.
Okay,
so maybe
I'm
back
so
up a minute or so.
For this endless technical issue. So like in this village, the site was selected very close to the Lowe's Gully head, which is actually the most vulnerable part in the village. And it faces, soil erosion. It is prone to soil erosion there. So by selecting the site here, you can prevent the water just overflow from overflowing and it erodes the water, the gully head, and also
Yapeng, we've lost him. All right. We're going to try for one more thing for another moment, and then we may move on to our final presenter. And if possible, we will come back to Yapeng. Okay. To keep us going, what I might do is, Alessia, are you?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yapeng, I think we're going to just move to Alessia now, and then if we can, we'll try to get you back on board, and then we will finish your presentation. Apologies for the disruptions, everyone. Alessia, could we turn to you, please? Are you ready to share your screen? Thank you so much.
Yes. Can you hear me all very well?
We can hear you fine.
Okay, just to be sure, I'm going to I don't know, it seems that here there's an interruption. Can you?
There we go. Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay,
it's not
perfect.
yet in slideshow mode. Can you
yes, great. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. Good.
Wonderful.
I will try to speak slow and stay in 8 minutes. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here. And this is my first time that I'm sharing this thought, this research, and I'm very, very pleased and I'm welcome to give you feedback about this. So as you can read, the title is "The Culture is the Harmony Created by the Human Spiritual Dimension." So I am a paper conservator, and also I'm specialized on disaster risk management. I was really focused on culture, you know, because culture is defined as the expression of our identity, our ancestor. It gives us, it gives us resilience. It is our history. And in addition to this, it gives us also hope in case of disaster, as we can also see from previous presentations that, you know, there's also very strong connection with the tradition and the way to solve problem and issue that also environment creates. And the question is also how can of the topic of the cultural peace and climate, how culture can be the driver to peace. So in my research, I just really at a sort of overwhelm. I was really searching everywhere, I would say, and I found a little bit help in the economical field. And that's why I'm bringing you there, because in order to better address the market, the economists have studied human behavior. And for example, we are quite familiar with the Maslow Pyramid, which express the level of the human needs. There are the primary needs, which are the physiological and the safety needs, and then the social and relation needs here. And the need, of course, for self-realization. The needs are presented in a pyramid, so in a temporary, so it means that you can climb them, so from down to go up. But and you have to reach from the physiological, the safety, and then go on. And if eventually, but not for everyone, you can reach the self-realization, the self-actualization of yourself. This perspective is, of course, it's very interesting, but it's not sufficient because it does not give us space for human expression. Before going to give you the other perspective, I want to recall the Eastern paradox, which is, for example, in Italian language, is called the happiness paradox. And in the 70s, when they were studying, they realized that above a certain threshold, economic welfare is not related to well-being and happiness. And this was very, very a shock, because in the early 70s, the motto was to gain happiness by becoming richer and richer. So this was actually a really shock. There was something that they were So the producing was not the solution for reaching happiness. And let's now move to, this is the main focus of the human dimension. These three dimensions meet. There are the material, the social relation dimension, and the spiritual dimension. As you can see here, there's no pyramid, it's a circle. And to be a circle, all of them need to be in the same area. So it's very important that that there is a balance amongst them. The three dimensions need a qualitative measure. They are interdependent, and each needs the other for its existence, and each needs the measure of the other. All the three must be present and coexisting in harmony, and you cannot have two large one and one less, or non-existent. The material dimension, which was largely studied by economy and survival, satisfies the basic need of which allow us to survive. Then we have the social relationship dimension, is linked to affections, love, trust, mutual esteem. Therefore, it brings with it a dimension of mutual help, brotherhood, benevolence. It is therefore the basis and the necessary for the civil coexistence that is serene and healthy. It is a cooperative relationship to achieve a common goal. This social relation is with the others. Then we have the final one, the spiritual dimension, which is very stiffer in our existence. Is linked to equity, harmony, soul, and beauty. These are aspects fundamental because they represent a typical human tension toward sacredness, universal love, and this therefore a relationship of transcendence, what is and has been created for the others. Every human expression made for others is culture, and culture is made for the others. And this recognize and strive to preserve. For example, we have the manuscript of Timbuktu in Mali, or it is condemned when damaged, because the Buddhas of Bamiyan, for example, in Afghanistan. The spiritual aspect concerns the transcendent relationship. It transcends the self and the other to rejoin a universal vision and the self-realization of oneself. And it is a relationship that aims to generate harmony between oneself and the world. There is also an in-action manifesto, related to what was said at the open ceremony. It's everyone can actually be part, because every one of us can be and act. So to go into back to this. Therefore, the cultural expression are the witnesses of this transcendence, and they are the work for others. I think from a traditional point of view, if we all see, and I'm just going to share with you just one example, is for the Notre Dame of Paris. It took 100 years to be built completely. So the first person who start to work with, or the first people that start to collect money, they knew they will not be able to see the final result. So they have worked for the others. I think this is also from an economical point of view, we can touch understanding of this spiritual dimension in the benefit corporation, which are for-profit corporate entities that aim to balance their profit-making purposes with the objective of transparency, sustainability, and the mission of having a positive impact on the environment. And I really believe that GLAM, so with this I sum it up all our world of cultural heritage professional can also can strive and work with the benefit corporation and also give and share the knowledge that are created and protected to enhance the spiritual dimension, work for others, and so at the final create peace for all of us. I want to say thank you, and I have just really the last slide is a Global in Action Manifesto that you can read in and search later on. I think this is. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alessia. That's brought in a different plane there, which is really, really nice to see. Finally, we know Yapeng is back with us, and it does appear we've gotten his slides working again. So with appreciation for your patience, that's the words I'm looking for, we will move back to Yapeng.
Okay, I'm really so sorry for all these problems. I'll be very, very quick to finish my presentation. And okay, I'm already almost there. Okay, I'm really so sorry for all these problems. I'll be very, very quick to finish my presentation. And okay, I'm already almost there. I wonder if you can see it properly, or
it's not yet in the slideshow mode, but we can see your slides.
Okay, then
we'll just roll with that.
Yeah, okay, great. So I was talking about this slide just now. So in terms of the risk reduction, I think there is really a lot of philosophical thoughts which are worth investigating. So like how to divide a major risk into a minor one. Like actually in this site, there used to be 2 ponds. So just next to the primary one, there is a rectangular secondary pond, but which is now filled up. And so when there is a very big storm, and let's say the water in this first pond just overflows, it will just flow into the secondary one. So in this way, you can still prevent the flood directly eroding the less scaly head. And at the same time, for me, it's really a practice of the way of the mean. So, or in Chinese, you say 中庸. So that means you should never go extreme. So when you hate something, you should never just hate it. You should also love it. And that means there is no absolute risk. Of course, you are trying to avoid a flood, but when you are avoiding it, you are also trying to capture part of it, like in this secondary pond, so you can still use it when the flood is gone. So in so doing, you really manage to prevent both soil erosion and landslides. And also in terms of climate mitigation, I also wonder how this facility contributed to building a livable built environment. So I would say if I compare a Chinese village to an Italian one, a French one, I think one biggest difference is the Genius Loci in a Chinese one. Normally it is a pond. It is a pond, and since this pond normally creates a spatial enclosedness and surrounding by temples or vernacular houses, and so it creates really a space where people are very attracted to gather. And also in terms of landscaping, this is very, very classical Chinese landscaping technique, which is called borrowing. So that means when you create a pond, and you will also consider its what kind of landscapes, both in terms of the micro scale, meso scale, and the macro scale. And like this one, it just borrows the mountains, very, very far away from it. So that you create really a very terrific landscape, overall landscape. And also in terms of social cultivation and continuity, like the rural societies its continuity is based on social ethos and social cultivation. like in this village, and this village is dwelled by the descendants of the father of Chinese historiography, and so the teachings of this very important historian has been transmitted to generations and generations. But how do you do this? You cannot just give them books, but you will concretize the teachings into landscaping. Like they built this pond to symbolize the ink, and also next to the pond they built this stele pavilion with inscriptions about the story of this village and the pond and how the pond has been created and maintained. So this pavilion symbolizes actually the Chinese brush. So like you will use the brush to and the ink to write compositions. No, that means as parents you should always highlight the education of your children. So in this way, the village manages to pass down the values, the beliefs. And also a lot of buildings are related to vernacular beliefs, and I won't spend time on that. And also in terms of place of memory, the last point is how the flood pond has been an example of coupling technology and culture. There is an excellent example in this village. The pond is also located very close to the Les Galley head. Also, and just in front of it, you have a temple of God of Fortune. And just beneath the temple, you have a almost 20-meter drainage channel built of bricks. And so when the water just overflows, it will pass there is a pebbled channel leads to the entrance under the temple of God, and the water just flows into the drainage channel and then just flows into the Les Galley without eroding the galley head. And also there is a like a correspondence relationship between this temple of God and also the temple of God, the temple in the stronghold. So in this way, you build a safe living environment. So as I mentioned, since the 2016, there has been initiatives to revitalize lodge in my province, and there were these guidelines. And so why they decided to revitalize is because there has been really a I would say impoverishment of rural landscapes or rural heritage. And secondly, there is also a worsening rural water ecology. And to revitalize lodge, you are not just replicating the older ones, and you are trying also to overcome the shortcomings, like considering that there's in traditional lodge there is a lack of vegetation and landscaping in its immediate environment, and there's a lack of safety facilities and warning signs and no innovative functions to satisfy local communities' needs of higher quality of life. So these are the principles, and also 4 technical focuses, like water should not overflow, leak, or dry or stink. And in terms of the regeneration practices, I think what is so good is they didn't create new sites. Mainly they reclaimed those abandoned ones or those filled flood pond sites. And most part of the techniques used have been based on the traditional knowledge. They revitalized such techniques as laying, leveling, sprinkling, and ramming. And but there has also been a technical improvement, like they adjusted the proportion between lime and the soil to 3 to 7. What has been regenerated followed the, I will summarize as a coupling between ecological restoration and vernacular cultural revitalization. So after all the efforts, what they have created is really a harmonious cultural landscape that helps improve large water absorption and water storage capacity, but also beautify its natural landscape and the surrounding environment and improves its water purification capacity. And like they installed all these safety signs and the safety enhancement facilities. And so this is a regenerated large site. And this is also a restored one. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and appreciate so much your persevering through the technical difficulties. It's very disruptive. Okay, everyone, we don't have many minutes left in our session, but we've had the 5 lovely presentations bringing through these different threads of learning from the past. And so with the time that we have available, please put any questions that you have for the presenters into the chat. And I will turn over to my co-moderator, Samuel. We have a couple questions that we would like to try against the presenters to see, pull out their thoughts. So Samuel, can I turn it over to you for questions?
Thank you, Marcy. Yes, well, first of all, I would like to congratulate everyone for these wonderful and very educational presentations. It is evident that we all have the same problems in the whole planet due to the climate change. And it is also evident that every culture has its own traditional knowledge that we should combine with modern technologies. That's my reflection after listening to the great presentations. And now I would like to see if there are questions from the public to the presenters, or the presenters have some questions. So please, you can go ahead in the chat, or if there's anyone who would like to start with a question from the audience. So otherwise, I would ask, what does the learning from the past mean to you? Can anyone answer that? What does learning from the past mean to you, to the presenters? Mara, Yahoo, Alessia.
I can jump in if you want.
Please do so.
I have not only the feeling, but I see that in the past there was a balance, there was a respect in working with the nature. There is a mutual benefit. That's why now we need to go back to have this mutual benefit, and not just as Anthropocene, not just using the earth as it belongs to us, and they do not actually. It's a complex, so we need them as long as also, but they don't. The earth, I mean the globe, the nature, the plants, the trees, the mountains. They don't need us. We need them. So I think if we see from the past, there was a more a benefit. There was more a respect. They were not. They would. I see, for example, in the forest, they were taking care of the forest. They were not just leaving them. When they were taking care, also because so they can take the fruit from the chestnut tree. I'm just taking an example that I see in my home country. And while now we just go to the supermarket, we buy a bunch, we need a huge ton, you know, while before we just needed the amount that the nature was given to us. Now we want bananas from the other side of the world, you know, this kind of things. We eat the tomatoes in winter, you know, this kind of, there are little things that I think that's why I think that we need to go back where we were at the tradition, you know, also the grandmother, how they used to cook, what they used to cook in winter. These little things, I think they're really relevant. So.
Yeah, thank you, Alessia. And I think we have a question here from the audience, from participants, from Grisel Meneses. She asks, to what extent nature and cultural conservation programs could become a mechanism of wealth redistribution, or how to ensure that these programs will effectively benefit local and indigenous communities?
If I can answer this one, you know, like at least as a start, you know, like so basically there's a kind of outsider approach, like a top-down approach or central approach to local communities, and this is quite damaging in a way. So modernization, for example, or introducing development to local community in a remote area should consider also this kind of traditional, let's say, aspects in a way. And in order to consider it, we have to put it also, as we emphasize in our presentation, this kind of monetary terms, you know. So for example, traditional knowledge has a value, and the value should be translated into monetary terms. One of the frameworks, for example, which addresses this is ecosystem services. When we consider, for example, culture ecosystem services, this kind of culture ecosystem services, it has a value and has a monetary value which needs to be considered in management plans, for example, legal framework, and so on. So this is very important to ensure that this kind of wealth of knowledge is translated in a monetary term, which the central governments or regional governments can really see in this sense. Otherwise, they will always consider it as if it is something which cannot be exploited to the fullest extent. And the only way to exploit it actually is to exploit it through direct revenues, which is damaging and unsustainable.
Thank you, Ahmed. We have another question from Samia Kirchner. How can professionals learn conservation design and strategies from indigenous communities, since they know how to live in concert with nature?
I could give an answer to that. And this is something that we've been starting to do, as I mentioned, through our work with universities. I mean, I don't know whether any of the present day residents of Iraq could be called indigenous communities exactly, because, you know, a truly indigenous way of life, it doesn't really exist anymore. But there are elements certainly that have been passed down for a very long time that are part of that heritage. So I'll include it within that bracket of indigenous knowledge. And there certainly seems to be demand and interest from what we can see from universities, both within Iraq and internationally, in coming and learning from those traditions. So we have at the moment, there's the group from Basra University, but there's also a course at MIT, which is going to be starting this coming term, where students won't be physically coming to visit us, but one of their tutors will be, and the students will be learning remotely. And it's, you know, the course has other contents as well, but it includes the work that we're doing with makers and communities who use those traditional building methods. So studying those through observing them and also documenting them. The students who are physically there on site have been recording the whole building process in detail and having direct conversations with the makers. So it's a practical and a conversation-based learning process.
say thank you, Hannah. I think we're running out of time. We're very short, but I would like to make a question, two final questions. Maybe what's the response or the attitude of the new generation, the young people, towards traditional knowledge, for example? That would be my first question. Maybe you can answer before I go to the next one. What is the reaction, or what is the attitude of the young generation toward the traditional knowledge? I mean, do you think there is a positive attitude, or there's a rejection, or any other reaction?
Well, I'm sorry if I jump in. I'd like to add some of my thoughts on this question. I think there's always a return. There is always a return when we go too far away from where we come from. There will be a return when we feel the need. So I think, like, just give you an example of China, no? So I really noticed that the younger generations who were born like after 2000, they really show much more affinity with traditional Chinese culture. Like they really like drinking tea. So now you have a lot of tea bars in China, and so this change is very, very significant. But I think in terms of the feeling for traditional knowledge, I think first of all we need to maybe create a scenario where they could approach to this knowledge, you know, like if it's really cut off from the mainstream narrative or their daily life. I mean, it's hardly thinkable how they are gonna like it. So I think the first thing is we need to shed light on this hidden, this unknown knowledge, and also I will say that given that most of such knowledge is taken care by rural people, rural populations, but under this unstoppable urbanization, rural communities are destined to shrink, to decline. So I think it's really high time that we just investigate it and build maybe a inventory or database of the traditional or indigenous knowledge, and make it also accessible to the public. So, and also, of course, in terms of collaboration between different countries, will also be very, very important, also to promote a mutual understanding of our common humanity and our common past. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Yapeng. I think you're very right when you mentioned that everything goes by cycles, you know, because it is the same in our culture, in our environment, in Latin America, Central America, I mean, with all the indigenous communities. I mean, the young people now, the new generation, are so much into social media, globalization, I mean, all these new things from modern technologies. But so I think we're living now a cycle, a timing of the cycle that we are on the other extreme, I mean, the younger generation. But there will be a time when, as you said, everybody will look for the roots. Where do we come from? You know, so we will get them back in sometime. So we have to be positive that, you know, the cycle will continue. And then just to conclude, there is an important question that we have to all of you. As what do you see as the most essential next steps? Or what is most needed? What is it most needed in working with the past to address climate change and the range of its challenges?
Maybe if I can jump in to share a few thoughts there. One of the things I've always found quite complicated when you think about heritage and the way that it's we can take steps with it to ensure that it doesn't aggravate trends towards climate change already is, for example, the example of the St. Catherine's Monastery that I talked about, where the declaration of a World Heritage Area created drives towards urbanization and towards increased visitors towards the area, which of course have a carbon imprint as well. which increases the demands on water supplies, which are already scarce, and can really push the vulnerable kind of like balance of an area in out of sync. And if I'm thinking of that specific example and of ways to take steps, practical steps to improve that, it would be to really stimulate ecotourism initiatives and try to put limitations on the large scale kind of like mass tourism that we often see associated with such sites. And I know I'm only speaking from a specific example, but if as international institutions, as professionals, heritage professionals working with heritage, if we can do one thing, we can kind of like control and push the type of tourism we stimulate towards sites like that. And that's a few thoughts I would have. I don't know, it would be interesting to hear other people's opinions.
Yes, we'd like to hear other people's opinion about what should be the next, what do you see as the most essential next steps?
Well, maybe I can share my opinion. I totally agree with what was said before. I think that one of the other steps that is essential now is to work on young researchers. For example, I'm an archaeologist. I was trained in Italy, and here in Italy, archaeology is still mainly aimed to fill museums. If you can, is to find something that we can share as history, but is not used to create tools. It's not used to create an effective knowledge about which kind of insights and food for thought this historical knowledge could give us. And so is something that is seen as completely separated from policies, political, economical policies, but also territorial policies. So this is true for people that are not in academical research, academical historical research, but is usually true also for many students in humanities. If you don't study social sciences or things like that, usually the perception is that you don't owe nothing to the society. You just have to contribute to the historiographical process and nothing more. And I think that this is a real invalidating cognitive bias, because this don't allow us to make any progress in this direction.
Thank you, Mara. We also have some answers from the audience, from Samia Kirchner. It says, so one of the essential next steps would be integrating facilitation skills and humility in conservation training. Also linking social issues to heritage and climate priorities, engaging local communities in defining the outstanding universal value. So I don't know, Marcy, how we are in time, if we have more time, or you would like to jump in with the conclusion of the session.
Yes. Thank you so much, Samuel. I think we do, looking at the time, we do need to wrap up the session. What is currently going on now in the conference is what's called the Climate Open Mic. So if folks would like to continue discussing, the link to the open mic session is in the chat. So you're welcome to move on over there, and there's a bit more of an open forum to discuss for that. I'm going to stand with Samuel and everyone who's been saying thank you so much for these wonderful presentations. I think I still have resonating in my head Amara's final point of thinking about the questions that we ask of the past and what we see as our responsibilities. That was a wonderful way of pulling that together, and I'm going to be thinking of that as we go forward into the conference. So thank you all so much for bringing your lessons from the past, starting this conversation, and looking forward to continuing the conversation as we go forward into the conference. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you to all of our presenters. All best.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.